Are
First
we
time you did this was what, 07?
Oh, seven, that's when we did,
7, 8? Yeah, yeah.
I was on the commission.
We good?
Yeah.
Okay,
Doing that work remotely.
sure. Yeah, I'm good. We're live now? Okay. Well, I'm John Carmen. It sounds like, at least now I know everybody, but perhaps we go around, I think. You want to introduce yourself?
I'm Ruth Ryan, Ryan.
Okay.
Dana Lewis, I'm chairman of cemetery committee.
Lauren Newman. Mary Gamble.
Right.
Tyler Dixon.
I'm John Katz, the city engineer.
David Millian, city manager.
Thank you. So my firm, Carmen, out of Lexington and Louisville, has been engaged to work on the cemetery master
Sorry, I
plan.
could not hear you.
Yeah, and do I need to be standing in front of the monitor? Okay. I'll try not. So my firm, Carmen, out of Lexington and Louisville, is engaged to provide a update for the two cemeteries. With me today, Tyler Dixon is a colleague of mine, and Tyler and I have been working on this. We actually got started last fall, and through the course of the winter and some change in administration, things were put on hold a bit, but we hit the start button back several months ago and been working John Castle and David Milliron for the past several months, and we're at a point where we felt like we need to share some of our ideas. This is a master plan update, so a lot of what you're going to see is maybe on the surface appears a lot different, but there's some similarities to the master plan that we completed in '08, and several of you are familiar with that and previously made reference to it. Why don't we? I maybe didn't bring enough copies, but I do have some copies that I will leave you with, or you all can look at as we go along. And this is a draft. This is by no means a finished document. John and David, you all have seen this. You need a copy? Okay, Rick, would you like, okay. Everybody's good. So my intent today is not to go through this line by line, word for word, but I want to hit the highlights. And as I mentioned, a lot of this is a lot about the history and background of the two cemeteries. And what I think is important is that we emphasize that there is a lot of history with both cemeteries. And along with it, I think there needs to be, as there is, we need to maintain that respect for each cemetery. Each cemetery is a working cemetery. There are sites that are available in each cemetery. More so at Hilldale, I believe there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a 7 to 10 year projection for grave sites currently in Bellevue. One of the reasons why this master plan update was started was because the city was able to acquire a tract of land that is just to the right of this image that you see, which is the entrance to Hilldale. I think you actually traded some property with the Board of Education, so that small, narrow tract of land that connects First Street to the parking lot of the high school, you're able to acquire, which will give you expansion opportunities that maybe will extend your life by perhaps another 5 to 6 years. So Whereas Hilldale, I don't think there's any issue with expansion capability. In the Hilldale property that we know of, the primary cemetery, there are several areas that are wide open, and then there's a scattering of grave sites, available grave sites throughout. So this is Bellevue. You all are familiar with Bellevue. And we talked about, and I don't see the pointer, but I think, yeah, here it is. So this is the area that was acquired from the Board of Education. The site throughout is fairly full. We have the area in the north area, and I'm having trouble following this. There it is. So this area is quite a bit of availability, and we're going to point out maybe some other acquisition or expansion areas. I think you're all familiar with the conditions. We don't find the conditions to really to be any different than what they have been for a number of years. On the southeast, on the southeast corner, over adjacent to the high school parking lot, there still remains some drainage problems that, and I think that's in the cremain niche burial area that probably should be addressed at some point. As far as, we just go into a lot about the history of the cemetery. We can go through this, I mean, if you'd like, but again, I want to get into the more salient points about some of the recommendations and issues. Again, Hilldale hasn't really changed that much. There's been in both cemeteries, there's been a few minor additions. The cemetery directory has been put in since the last plan. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. The area on the so this area is the primary area where expansion and burial sites can occur. There's already an existing pull-off there. We'll talk about that. But, there is property across Duncan Hill. You'll see inside of the yellow dashed area that is owned by the city and dedicated for the cemetery. It probably needs to, while it could be a good expansion area, it's not necessarily needed now. We'll talk about possibly that could possibly be a site for a pavilion or committal shelter. There needs to be work done on that area, primarily bringing some fill material in. It does slope off steeper than what we would like for a burial area. One of the big topics, and we started talking about this when I last met with you back in the fall, and I know it's a topic of discussion amongst the committee is, and we talked about it in 07, 08, is the use or the need for a pavilion, or sometimes formerly known as a committal shelter. The committal shelters can serve a number of benefits. The obvious benefit is that you can get away from a graveside service and have a protected shelter that is permanent. Graveside services with the tents are very traditional, so we've seen actually some pushback from people not having a graveside service. A pavilion does certainly offer that permanent kind of structure that can be used. It can also, a pavilion or committal shelter can provide a part of the cemetery. It can become part of the landscape, part of the architecture of the cemetery. We're showing a few examples here, some of which are not. I think all but one are maybe in cemetery settings. You'll see the middle left is actually a wedding chapel, but I felt the architecture and the feel of it was be very light and very appropriate. So you'll see some common themes with these cemetery shelters or the one chapel is that they're very airy. They're very kind of light on the landscape. They're not real dense. So while they become a part of the cemetery, they're not the most dominant structure in the cemetery. You don't want to take away from the historic nature and the true reason for being there. One reason why these type of structures, from an architectural standpoint, one reason why they can become somewhat light and very open in the area is the fact that they don't have ceilings. They're open trusses. Some of these are actually very, very simple structures. The other part about a structure or pavilion, middle shelter is, do you want to have any other kind of facilities associated with those, such as just a simple storage room, which you'll see in some of these. Storage of chairs, storage of a casket bier. You want to have lighting associated with this. If you do, you may need electrical panel, electric service. You want to have a PA system. Those kinds of back of house things can be placed in the storage building. Do you want to store flags? In a military VA scenario, the storage rooms are often used as the changing room for the honor guard. That maybe happens periodically in Danville. Maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, they have changes.
They always come dressed.
No, they come dressed, they come to the funeral home and change it.
Okay.
And they come like an hour and a half.
Right. Well, I'm just mentioning that there are other uses for this. So
Usually the area in the cemetery, in the building is locked. And, you know, because that's where we keep the chairs and stuff.
right. And in scenarios where I've seen the honor guard use that as a changing room, because it is right there, they don't have to show up an hour and a half, and usually that's going to be unlocked
Well,
or
I think
chairs.
the regulations say,
Okay, so and that'll be another part of some of the discussion items. And while we're not really focused on changing regulations and
yeah.
policies and everything, you know, we might want to talk about it. But that's kind of a little bit of a
It's
tangential.
really not that necessary unless you need to store chairs or something.
Yeah, let's not get focused on a changing room. I just mentioned that's been done that way before. I think that the real practical part about a storage room is storage of chairs.
Yeah.
Mary, I'm not sure what the funeral homes do, but you probably bring your own casket beer.
Well, we have stands and we
Stands,
have,
okay.
and the city for many years has kept our stands because they use it for other funeral homes.
Okay, okay.
So, you know, that's okay.
But, I mean, again, we're
But
just talking about opportunities. If you wanted to,
Use the beer in a cemetery, but the stand-
right.
We discussed this extensively in cemetery committee meetings, and the storage area is one thing we think is necessary.
I think it's
I think it's
you'll probably find out.
That's what our opinion has always been.
Well, I tend to agree with you, and
If it were big enough to store some equipment, it would be great, because,
Yeah.
we used to have the garage and they.
that's
stored
right,
everything in
that's
there.
right. Yeah,
Yeah, and so, and that's one thing that both cemeteries are lacking, is someplace to store equipment.
that you
On
need,
site.
right.
Yeah.
Not a backhoe, but
No,
just other,
but just
yeah,
things
right.
that are going to be necessary
Right.
for that funeral service.
Right.
And these are the things that we discussed at length, and we think are really essential.
And I agree with that. And it doesn't have to be a, big storage building. It can be a large storage closet.
There's.
We had already picked out structures that
Right.
Yeah.
So, those structures, that you all had looked at were shared with me, and I brought forward some of our ideas, that felt were very appropriate. Not that I'm saying pick one of these and insert it,
Understand.
but, I'm just trying to get a feel across that would be appropriate. We don't strongly recommend that you do not construct something that doesn't feel appropriate for the site. Could you build the same identical pavilion at both Hilldale and Bellevue? You could.
That's what we had discussed.
I think you could. I think if you could modify that minimally, if you wanted, the flip side of that is both are getting the same thing. And the flip side of that is, could you create a separate identity for each? And that, just because they both have different sites, different part of town, different cultures. So it doesn't bother me that you may want to change up. That doesn't mean that they both couldn't be a 30 by 40 footprint with a 8 by 12.
They have to be basically the same. They don't have to look exactly the same.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
But they have to be fitting with the landscape and with the structure.
So we're saying the same thing. I think
Right.
operationally, functionally, they can be exactly the same. Is the pitch of the roof down a little, paint color, there could be some minimal differences that give a specific identity. But I think being airy and open is very important and not really set real heavy. I don't think we need a real heavy brick or stone structure. Can we use stone or brick or some other material for accent? Absolutely, I think so. I think it should be a concrete floor, just for being practical. I don't know that there would be other events or ceremonies that could use this, but it could be. Do you all still have the different services, say from Memorial Day or July 4th? Or the
Yes.
different- primarily associated with the VA cemetery? Right. Okay. So I mean, that could happen. Particularly Hilldale, I don't know if there's any particular events that take place. I meant at Bellevue. I'm not sure about Hilldale. So anyway, these are, I think this is maybe one of the larger issues to talk about. Changing trends, and we've talked about this with regards to the trend of cremation. And I think you're seeing some increase in that, but I think I recall, Mary, that you were telling me that Danville's not really on a real steep incline with cremation.
Well, I
But
mean, it's increasing. We're
It's-
probably at 33, 36%.
well, that's a pretty good, that's I think higher than what we even talked about, when we met back in the fall. So I think that number is probably
We're
going
seeing
to,
very few burials. for cremation now.
is it all
People are
scattering
taking the ashes home
or bring, right?
and doing.
They'll scatter whatever, wherever,
Yeah,
do whatever.
in
Okay.
Kentucky law, cremation is considered the final disposition.
Right.
So they don't have to do anything.
That's correct.
After we.
So we're seeing trends for the columbarium, as we show here. We're also seeing some uptick in trends for the in-ground niche at a burial site of a relative. I think John and Dave and I were talking about this maybe week before last, and not sure if the current policies allow that.
What do you mean,
Bill,
an in-ground niche?
well, you actually take the urn and you bury it right there.
Oh, we do that all the time.
Okay, is that allowed by policy? Okay.
Just like you would bury a casket.
Right, it's right there, but it's in the same burial site as
Yes.
a
Yes.
family member.
Bellevue starts, the deeds to the lots are fee simple.
Right.
And the Bellevue is the easiest cemetery for families to use for a family cemetery.
Right.
because they, allow families to have multiple people in a home. When they're.
Okay,
when they're
so
cremating.
that policy, are you seeing quite a bit of that?
When I tell you, when a family says, we really want to bury him between mom and dad, will they allow that? And I'll say, yes, Bellevue will allow you to do that, and they're thrilled. There's
Good,
some people that have actually bought graves in Bellevue just
Because they're allowed to do that.
Yeah, because it's very consumer friendly.
Yeah, okay, good.
Where I have one that I'm gonna do pretty soon, and it has been pulling our teeth to get this worked out.
Okay, so, that is,
And there's a small fee for that. It's not.
Oh, yeah, sure,
Yeah,
sure,
it's
Sure,
really-
absolutely.
for it.
Yeah.
That's no problem.
so, I think we talked previously about the columbarium. We're seeing just a variety. I think it has to do with the culture and the location. East Coast is probably becoming more prevalent because they don't have land. In the South and in this area, not as much so, but do we, because we recommend that you account for columbariums. That doesn't mean that we're going to say, go out and spend $50,000 now, but I think from a planning standpoint, we need to look ahead in the future and plan that trend may rise. And I think somebody said that there was a new columbarium being built or had just been built at the Episcopal Church. Am I imagining that?
How did I know?
Okay, well, maybe it's a Episcopal Church somewhere. So, I
They
think,
have a scatter yard here.
Yeah, they
had it for a long time.
okay, but not I must be imagining. Okay.
I don't know that they were in for
I don't think there is a specific scattering garden in either one of the cemeteries, and I don't know if we want to consider that or not. I don't see that as a large trend, other than the veteran cemeteries.
You know, if you could run a river through Bellevue, then you have a, then you have a lot of scatter, and I think that's what most.
I think originally that cremation circle was intended to be sort of a scattering place. But the drainage has been so bad, many people won't use it as such.
There used to not be a drainage problem in that area.
I know.
It apparently has settled.
Well, they came in and if you are looking down the road at the circle, all the land on the right, it used to go down and the water all ran over into the school's lot. And then they came and they filled it in, so
And that's what happened, and that floods that cremation.
So we talked with John about this, and I think the city's looking at ways of trying to get that water out of there, even to the extent of a small pipe going over towards the practice football field.
Well, it's much better than it used to
Yeah,
be.
right.
It's not nearly as bad as it.
But before they put the water in there was not a problem with water standing in the road.
It's pretty flat back there. It doesn't have a real good way of getting out of there if you go back and look. So, there's a way of getting a pipe all the way back to where it drops over the hill. So a few things about, we'll jump into Bellevue real quick. And again, we're showing the area of expansion of the lot that was acquired by the high school. 300, roughly about 350 sites, burial sites in that area. Just in that area along down the south end. First Street. We're showing on the top part, the north part of the plan, we're showing that it is a possible expansion area or acquisition area. And this is really pushing it out long-term. That has the easiest access from the main cemetery to the property to the north. There would have to be some grading and fill in there, but it's certainly not as severe as if you go along to the right, because it really does drop off. So that's another potential area. You could push that out. quite a ways. I don't know if that is a cooperative property owner or what, but again, we're looking out here. long
Has there
term.
been any thought to just making a U-shaped road and coming off that new part? And
You know,
doing
that-
away with the cul-de-sac?
You talking about coming off of the cul-de-sac and,
Yeah.
you know, we look at, it really starts to minimize, it almost eliminates that one row of. So our thought, and if you look at the very lower right-hand corner, our thought was, okay, let's use the drive and the cul-de-sac as the queuing area. It's really not that far of a walk over that. We're even suggesting, I'm about half colorblind, so I lose this little red dot. Anyway, we're suggesting like like a memorial walk between the cul-de-sac down into this new area. Putting a road,
We're gonna have to carry a gas. That's
pardon?
the biggest concern.
Well, that was another reason, putting a walkway in there, at least it gets you down into that area on a hard surface and then and we're kind of dropping it in somewhat towards the middle and then it just, you know, your furthest distance, Mary, would, I'm going to guess and say your furthest distance would probably be about 80 or 90 feet. But a road, it basically cuts about half of your burial site in there. If that,
That would eliminate much of the usefulness.
right, it's such a long, slender line. Now, but on the, you look at a lot of the other drives in the cemetery, and of course, we don't have that many available burial sites, but your walking distance is not much different in some of those other drives, but so do you see that as an issue, that distance to carry?
I just wondered how much.
Okay.
I just assumed that there would be a way to get in and out of there by car, but
Yeah.
I guess not.
Does that make sense what I'm saying though? I mean, you ran a drive through there, you're taking away about half of your.
And if you build a shelter, through, and you know, put it anyway, that through.
What?
If you have a shelter, the service is there, your crew would then take the body and piece of equipment, whatever needed, to where it needs to go.
Assuming there's not any kind of graveside service.
Families always go to the grave. Our family always goes to the grave, even if there's a shelter. I have not had one that families do.
Let me,
But I guess what I'm saying is, if you have a shelter, and have people there, you know, family walks over, watches, the dead there, you still can use the piece of equipment to load the body on and take it to the gravesite.
Okay, are families gonna be able to have the choice of the shelter or a graveside?
I think that's a decision, but I think, and
I
that's
would
why,
hope so.
yeah, that's why I preface my comments that,
Well, then they can make their decision.
From an operation.
And it's like John said, there are spots now that since so many of any graves to where the road, you have a further access from the
from
road
right.
than you would what we're talking about here.
And that's why I preface my,
Two, we're looking at, instead of hauling all that dirt away, then just some damage of the grade, starting to board, and maybe put the dirt, leave the dirt outside,
okay,
and then just
Sure.
rebuild from there. Right now, we're moving all the dirt out, and there's so much damage. We're looking at possibly doing what most cemeteries do, and just leave the dirt
right.
outside the grave site. You know, that's where shelter would come in. So, have a whole lot of people
Right.
standing there about the dirt.
And I don't recommend not allowing graveside services. I don't think the tradition has, and culture has changed that much,
I
so.
think that's
I'm saying
always
you
been,
don't talk to you, but
I think that's always been the intent of the cemetery committee, to give the family a choice, because, I mean, that's where.
Now, let me ask you, because you've obviously been to cemeteries where they have shelters. You get finished with your service, your committal service. Do the pallbearers take the casket from there to the graveside, or does
they
the
put it back in
cemetery
the
staff?
hearse. and the hearse drives to the graveside. and the
Okay.
Family all drives to the graveside.
Okay,
It's kind of like having two committal services without the preacher saying much on the second one.
right,
And
okay.
sometimes,
Well, it gives you that flexibility, I suppose, but you're saying almost exclusively the casket's put in the hearse, taken, but it's not the cemetery staff.
yeah, I can't think of.
I guess that could-
cemetery Where it's not.
Okay.
in the hearse.
Okay,
Unless the grave is just right there next to the shelter. Where it's, close enough that people could walk, but, otherwise, yeah, it's always put back in the hearse.
right.
The only one I've ever seen was in Louisville, where it was.
Okay,
Cave Hill.
what did Cave Hill use?
They,
Now, we've had it at Cave Hill where we did do that.
Yeah.
but,
well, the only funeral I've been to was Tom Smith, and they just left the casket there at the shelter.
Yes,
And then I think the three boys
yeah,
went over, but
I wasn't there, but Ann Yeager was.
everybody else left.
Yeah.
So it having that shelter provides you a lot of different options or scenarios, and maybe the pallbearers don't, and then everybody leaves and the cemetery staff then, so, but you've got that option.
We could always give them the choice of having the cemetery staff move it for them.
Right. It's another set of scenario.
These are things that are flexible.
Right,
They're not-
absolutely.
I don't think they should ever be cut and dried in stone.
So, we've talked about, you're seeing two options for location of the shelter. I'm going to throw out a third one that's not represented graphically. So we started talking about the shelter being, the open area, and I apologize, I can't see.
In the same boat.
Yeah, right in the middle there, right by the pull-off. We talked about that back in 07, 08. And I think that's still a viable option. My biggest concern with that particular location is that every side is the front door. You can see it from every side. So that storage room is going to be visible.
Part of it.
Part of it, right.
Yeah,
So,
that's how it is on almost all of them.
okay, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm trying to help you all think out of the box here a little bit. I'm just saying that is one in my mind, an issue. That all four sides are visible, all four sides potentially could be considered the front door, and you don't really have that kind of main focus. One other option I have, and you'll see that other little dot up there, is at the end of the road, where it's right in line. It becomes a focal point as you're driving in. Okay, there's actually a widened area down at the end of the road before it bears to the left. There's no doubt about what your front door is there. In that option. Down in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see the little schematic there. So you're right on focal point with the front of the middle shelter. Your storage room would be at the very back, not exposed. There's room for a pull-off. The pull-off actually is right ahead of, through the curb, you can pass the curb for your primary first and family vehicles, and then the portage could line up, on beyond to the left, or even back up the hill. So that's another option that I think actually has some legitimacy to it. Okay. The other option that I didn't show here is take the first option we talked about and just flip it across the road. They're on the other side of the road. And with that location, the storage room visibility doesn't become an option, just as a consideration.
Are you flipping it across the road just to the north of it?
Just to the north of it, where the tree line back, you've got the tree line, which is down, becomes, the kind of the backdrop for the shelter. The storage building, or storage room storage closet, whatever we're gonna call it, would be back on that side. So you would not be seeing it from any other direction other than the side of it. Unlike the first option we talked about where, let's just say the front of this, we'll call it the front of the pavilion would be facing the pull off that's there now. Storage room would be seen from everything up above, up on the upper part of the cemetery. So those are three options to think about. You like the one at the end of the road? Now, one thing we've talked about is the little, with or without the, I'm gonna have to get a big spotlight just for myself. I know that little red dot's up there somewhere. But the little, I won't even call it a roundabout, the little triangle, part piece of the road before you go down the hill. Probably need, with or without a shelter there, probably needs to be, massaged so that traffic can get, you know, and it wouldn't really bother me if it were more of a straight shot. Maybe you could put a split island in that little triangular intersections. A little bit clumsy. So those are the three options that we talked about, even though I didn't show them. You know. Does anybody have any other thoughts about?
The triangle works great for splitting up families where you can part of it.
Yeah, I'm looking at it from, yeah, you're looking at it from that standpoint.
I'm looking at it from, I had 25 cars in front of me that I've got to show them where to park.
Right. I think the emphasis to straighten that out, it would be a stronger emphasis if in fact you put the shelter down at the end of the road as we're showing. Okay.
Could you, if the shelter were at the end of the road, could you make the land on past it to the west, could you make that like parking?
You could. I think there, and
That would be real handy.
I don't see why you couldn't.
or that it could become parking, you could maybe even widen the road out a little bit. It could become burial plots, or we're showing that a little bit of that land to the west and to the left could maybe be reserved for future columbarium. Those are always
You
convenient.
give us parking, don't take it away.
Typically, you don't have a whole lot of parking within a cemetery at most cemeteries, not.
Well, no, there's not. That's
Now, you
why
can
we have
widen-
to Figure out.
Yeah.
You know, where everybody's gonna park before we even go in.
So there's already been a trend all the way over, almost right where that road turns left, comes back up the hill, that,
Do the old single section.
yeah, but on the north side of that road, there's already, what, 3 or 4?
Evergreens.
Yeah, so there's a
Yeah.
trend of moving that way. There's, and I'm not sure of the nature of all that fill material in there, but I don't know if that.
You mean in the sinkhole?
Where it was building, yeah. It was building.
But what is,
Well, I
what
can
kind
tell
of
you, they
material?
used to take, we had to count to 15 before a rock would hit the bottom of it when I was growing up.
I didn't hang out in the cemetery to count it, okay.
It was our park, it was our playground.
Well, yeah, well, and that's right. But, so you could continue that trend of burial sites along that north side. There is some room there to do
Very
that
excited you're talking in the sinkhole area,
in the sinkhole area.
on the north side of that road.
I'm sorry, let me interrupt. Mary, when you were talking about the parking up on the north side of the road, that really is kind of where we're looking at.
For
Because
burial
of what you
sites.
remember from what
Right,
Jason
right.
told us.
That's where that was all sinkhole.
Yeah, from what Jason has told us about a lot of stuff and putting that fill, the location of this red asterisk up there, where the green asterisks are along the north side for parking. That's just a great area for surface stuff,
Yeah,
because it'd be difficult to do.
it'd be very difficult to bury people in there, because you go down 2 or 3 feet, and you've got junk.
Well, that's why I qualified. I don't know what's under there.
Yeah, well, there's washing machines. and all kinds of stuff.
Just name it, it's there.
Hopefully no unofficial dead bodies.
Most, of a lot of KCW's in there.
Like what?
KCW, when they tore it down on Lexington Avenue, built like.
Okay, so maybe that's not
John,
such a
we're
good
not
area,
sure what was in there.
but I'm a little, tradition's grabbing me, and I'm a little bit hesitant of saying, okay, let's put some pull-off parking spaces. I think widening the
Well,
road.
even if it's just flat grass, people
Yeah.
will pull over, and where you could have cars on the road and cars in the grass, and that would work great. It'd be
So-
nice to have a empty space close to you've got to have some parking for cars close to the shelter.
To the
And we
community,
just-
other than just the pull-off
Yeah.
for the Hearst and the family.
Hartsville is enlarged their parking area.
So I think you could widen the road there.
You know, you really don't even have to do that, because people don't care whether they're on blacktop, they just want to be close enough to walk easily to the shelter.
Well, that's one reason, when I say widen the road, not necessarily widen it big enough for a parking lot, but just making it more convenient for people to pull off, or you could have parallel parking. But also it widens that area for people to walk back towards the committal shelter, regardless of which location you have.
But we always have to be careful not to get too close to the grades, because they're where, you know, the one we have such a problem with. I get regular calls about people driving on her daughter's grave.
Yeah, so right in this area is where some of those, you'll see a few, I don't know, it's probably only what, 5 or 6 graves, and maybe not 3 or 4.
Back there.
Yeah, right back in that corner.
Huh?
Up in the extreme corner.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah. This
Right.
farmer used to use the field that's right behind there.
Uh-huh.
You know, there's a pretty good field with good ground. Daddy always tried to get the city to buy that when it would be, because it could have been easily added on to the cemetery. Oh,
one thing that I jumped too soon back to the mill shelters relative to the new property that's been acquired, down First Street, is we're suggesting that right there in front of the, down in this lower right-hand corner,
I was instructed to come in the meeting.
Do what?
Tell her to come on in.
She can
No,
sit
we're
right
okay. We
there.
have
It's
one.
in Yater. Okay. If the
Matt, that's-
number of
he's
people.
out of-
No.
I'll go out and I can watch.
I've already
it.
got it, George.
Let me do that. I'll swap out with her.
At the First Street lot, we were suggesting that there could be a 1 or 2 car pull off of First Street, and that the graveside directory be placed there. Where it's located now, on the left, as you go in, is a little bit, and if somebody stops there, they're kind of blocking the road. I think that would be a good place to put that graveside directory. It's on the proper side of the
We're
road.
families can sit together.
We don't be such a.
Yeah, we go through this all through.
So that's another consideration. We talked about a different type of graveside directory. I'm not even sure, right now, I think the one in Bellevue is just a map. I'm not sure there's a directory down in that shelf.
It's pretty much, but they put the shelf in there so that if we ever could put them out there. We've had maps before, and they disappear.
So there's a trend going to the electronic, computerized graveside directory. You can build something around them where they don't look like it, but they're essentially about the size of an 18-inch. Operate very well. And that's just thinking ahead of.
Well, our little kiosk there was an Eagle Scout project.
And that's identical to the one in Hillview. Yeah.
We had a young man who was working on his Eagle Scout there.
Okay.
And he built it.
Well, there's nothing that says you couldn't adapt that for a new type of, probably fit an ATM type of machine. Underneath that. Any questions about some of these comments? I want to captivate you all. It's already almost time. Okay, let's move to Hillville. Not a whole lot has changed here. We've talked about the expansion area across Duncan Hill. That is a possible location for the committal shelter pavilion. Much of what we talked about back in 07, 08. We even at that time, you may recall, suggested even making a modification to the road, really celebrating that entry with a roundabout. There's plenty of real estate because of the property owned across the road. There's a lot of fill material that has to take place before anything, burials, shelter, road, or anything.
It's solid rock there.
Yeah. John and I talked, we talked about, maybe it's over a period of years when you start bringing in the material where you could use that for burial site extension. We feel like where the pull-off is to the far east of the property, that actually is not a bad place for a pavilion or a committal shelter. Similar size, same size as what we would do in Bellevue. Same type of arrangement. We talk about maybe a little bit different appearance. It's right next to where most of the burials.
Some
new
kind of a
burials-
fence, did you say? What did you say?
But we could maybe have a little bit of different appearance
Oh,
with a shelter there than what it is at Bellevue. Same size, same operation, and the same. It's located in the area of the cemetery where most of the new burials will probably be taking place, so it's actually very convenient. You would be able to see it very easily as you actually enter into what is known as the primary entrance. And then as you drive along the long drive to the east, it would be very visible. So I actually think that's a good location for that. We would like to relocate the cemetery Babin directory closer to the primary entry, if at all possible. I think it's a little where it's located now in the middle entry is. I'm not sure how easy it is to find or how much it's even used, but again, if we could find, I think there are some open areas right adjacent to the road, but I'm really not sure as if there are any burials. A lot of those sites are right up on the road. So I think before I would recommend, or I would say, pull the trigger and put something somewhere, you do some investigations. There's a grave site there. I think that covers this. I think, again, the biggest decision on Hilldale is where to put the committal shelter and go ahead. And I think even if you were expanding on the other side of the road, having the committal shelter all the way to the east side is still not a bad location. On the north side of Duncan Hill would not be, it's maybe more central, but I'm not sure that that's going to occur anytime in the near future. So again, we've just brought forward some images. I know there's been a lot of research of late about trying to document and map, particularly with African-American cemeteries, burial sites that have not been identified. So there's organizations in Kentucky that are working on that. So I think continuing to stay engaged with those organizations would be good. So then our final plan will have some recommendations. We haven't necessarily prioritized them as of yet. But I think the shelters seem to be one of the highest priorities. And I think something could easily occur. I don't think you have to spend a huge amount of money, particularly on, if you look at some of the examples we brought forward, those are actually pretty simple and somewhat elegant, and keep using the word light and airy, but I think they're appropriate. And could be very nice for either cemeteries. I think always thinking about additional acquisition is always important. Primarily for Bellevue, I don't know what the opportunities requiring that land to the north is. Is Jody sharp on that?
Yeah, you're talking about Jody's land.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's been discussion about that ever since 2007. And we have entered into negotiations on more than one time, and
Well, understood. But I think always keep your eyes.
we've tried at least on four separate occasions when I was on the commission,
Right.
so I know those conversations happened.
Kevin, has there ever been any discussion with Jody about him donating part of it and getting a write-off plus money? That's a very good.
It didn't go at that time, I've always felt, if he comes to the,
I don't know what he said.
if he
Do
comes to the opinion that he's gonna be stuck with it, then eventually he'll. But it could, they've always said it was too rocky, but it
Well-
could be very easily, I think,
All your dirt from all the
Yeah.
you could go in.
and it could easily be,
So you touched on something that I had mentioned to John and David a couple of weeks ago. Before you ever put a nickel down on acquiring that land, you need to investigate fairly easily and fairly cheaply how deep rock really is.
that's been done.
Okay,
There have been, yes, that's been done. That was done when I was on the commission.
okay, is that information available? I'd love
It
to
should
see.
be, I don't,
Is that something maybe Earl or John could dig up?
should have it.
Okay.
Yeah, Earl was there.
What was the young man that was the assistant engineer?
Josh Moore.
Josh Morgan, he was the one that spearhead, he was
Okay.
working.
Well, I asked, I work with Josh a lot.
Do you?
He works at the finance cabinet.
I know he does.
So I've seen him
Tell
about once or
us,
two.
But at the
could you
time,
tell us what box it is stuck down? the
Well,
basement?
But I know it was-
Likely to remember.
I know it was done and
Okay.
it was, I'm thinking,
It was before the new city hall was built.
yeah, I'm thinking, I think it was more than once it was done.
Well,
They did a
I'll ask Josh.
perk test and all that.
Okay. Okay. So, that is an hour-long summary of what we've been doing. Several issues. As we all know that the shelter is probably the biggest issue.
It is the main issue.
We have not looked at what the reasonable cost would be. We could do that. I would encourage you to, if it means waiting a year or two to build the right shelter, wait a year or two rather than,
We've
Building
been waiting
something.
years, they've been waiting 5 years.
well, I
And we were
understand.
told every year that it was gonna be in the budget.
So is that money compounding interest that they
I
put
hope
aside
so.
for 5 years? Yeah.
But what's happened is the money we had has disappeared into the
Well,
fiscal year.
It's, right now it's a tough time for
I understand.
any public agency to be thinking about.
This was before the tough times, but we had.
Well, let's look ahead. and-
But we had some rough estimates. We didn't get down, we weren't approved to get any yet. But we were thinking that it should be done for less, at least no more than $70,000
For shelter.
And that was simple, very much like
Yeah.
the pictures you showed.
Yeah, I think that possibly could be a good ballpark. I know John has mentioned to me that there may be some in-kind work.
And that's one of the things they said at the time.
I would say that if you're pouring a concrete slab or maybe the foundations, digging the foundations, I would be okay with that. when you're coming to those items, you know, that needs steel, whether it be masonry or carpentry work, number one, get somebody who knows what they're doing, and number two, if the city does it and messes up, who are you gonna blame and who you're gonna have repercussions on? So this is not, with all due respect to the cemetery on Stanford Road, is that, give me a name, Mary, what's the name?
Yeah.
This is Hilldale or Bellevue is not that rural cemetery.
Well, Hilldale's shelter is part of its mausoleum, so, I mean, the Memorial Garden.
Right.
And,
That's right.
and that's a big problem.
Oh, I can imagine. So, but I'm saying just the nature of it, the history of it, the culture of it are completely different. I tend to have a bit more passion with these two cemeteries and with Danville than maybe I would somewhere else. But I think these two cemeteries justify and deserve, you know, something that is nice and sensitive to the landscape.
Well, we're really the only major cemetery anywhere in the area who doesn't have something of that nature, John.
Oh,
And
I agree. It's needed, but let's do it. If it means having to wait a year to do it right.
Is this what you are like suggesting, something like this? Because this is nothing like what we,
well, those are just examples.
Well, I've seen the suggestions that you passed on, and I think they are really heavy with brick and masonry.
Some of them work, some of them weren't. The one that we
No.
were, I think most in favor of was something like what you have at Camp Nelson, which is very open.
Right.
But to
And
me,
that's
this
very
is-
simple.
to me, this is not a real shelter. It's
It's just a pavilion.
rain can go in and it's just like a picnic park.
Well, so the other thing, the images that John provided me, that they had ceilings on the inside, which made them feel very,
Of the ones you showed, I thought
Not-
they were all open.
no, these other images that, yes, the ones I showed are definitely,
Are they all open in the roof area, or did one of them have?
One of them had a ceiling in it. I thought I had those with me, but evidently I took it out of my book.
I would say that not to have a roof. to have it
a ceiling, not
Or a
the
ceiling.
roof is the structure,
Okay.
we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
None of these
I
have
would,
ceilings.
I would not do something that was open to the rain. That would be a waste of time.
I
I
mean,
mean, if you're thinking this one on the bottom left is open to the sky, it's not, there's actually a
No,
shelter down the middle of it. And what you're talking about is it's like a pole barn, you know, it's open on the sides and there's no drop ceiling on the
Okay.
inside on all these examples. So we were talking to them about, you know, doing some different examples and we need to go back and revisit what y'all gave to us.
so even what you all gave, the sides were open,
yes.
so wind, you know, wind and rain could blow through even those. These are maybe a bit more open. There's some ways of tightening that up a bit. But again, I think the biggest difference in these types of structures we're showing is the fact that they do not have ceilings on the underneath. They have what I call an open truss that just makes it feel larger and more open. I think these are probably not any more open than some of the examples you're showing, other than a couple of these are the height between the ground and what I call the eave line is maybe taller. Those are pretty short structures.
Well, most of those were based on existing structures.
I understand. So we have an opportunity to do something new and now the one, for instance, I'm just going to give you some, for instances. The one on the upper left, that eave height is probably about 12 to 14 foot. It's probably not as much. It's probably only about 10 foot on the lower right. And then But they're not, and even on the middle right, that's probably only 8 to 10 foot. But they look larger just because they have that open truss. Yeah.
I looked at that top, it looks like a whole lot sitting outside the field.
We've done that on one cemetery and we came up with a means of, yeah, keeping them out.
Nobody's gonna have I don't think if it's a blizzard or cyclone, I mean, you just need something to shelter from rain or that extreme heat in the summer. So it should be.
The one at Buffalo Springs is totally enclosed.
I don't know something.
Now, where's Buffalo Springs?
Stand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the one at Parks was open, the one at Junction City is open.
Yeah,
Harrisburg is pretty big and it's open. The only problem with Harrisburg is they've got the wall, the only solid wall on the east side. So when the weather comes in from the west, it comes right in.
It's the best.
Yeah.
And that's in Harrodsburg?
Yeah. We get, there's a circle drive right around it.
The problem for us. Yeah.
Well, that's what we were talking about earlier. But I would not want it enclosed, no.
No, you get to the problem. you were
You're gonna
talking
get
about.
into it.
Understand.
Yeah, if you put a solid wall on the west side, then that pretty much protects, the people inside.
And Rick, you've got pictures of the Harrisburg one already.
Yes.
Yeah, the photos that you all provided me, I thought the scale was off. It maybe wasn't quite tall enough. to be
No, it's
like-
fine. Yeah, in Harrisburg,
No, I think you were talking,
There are pictures of Junction.
There was Junction City.
I'm not sure I've seen the Harrodsburg photo.
Clarksville, and then there was one, I believe, of Camp Nelson, was that someone?
No, I don't have that.
There wasn't?
Yeah,
Okay.
just Junction, or Junction.
And
Hartsville,
Hartsville.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
not,
Hartsville is just direct.
I know, they just put that one up in Lancaster has one.
Yeah, Camp Nelson has a couple different committal
Yeah.
shelters. One is the,
one's
I
for
think they have,
cremations, the other
I
one's
think
for-
they have, they may actually have 3.
No, they
I know they have 2. They have one that's fairly old, and I think it might even be like a wrought iron. what am I
So,
doing?
okay, and so the big shelter at Camp Nelson,
That's fairly new,
It's,
no, they're getting ready to redo it right
yeah,
but that's still fairly new. With it, well,
well, it's
now. It's been remodeled.
25 years.
15 or 20 years old.
Yeah, but they're getting ready to remodel it right now. And then there's a little shelter that they, was their temporary one that they were remodeling. to their current
That's
one.
correct.
So that's when they come in, and it's over in front of the Column Mall.
But they
Right.
don't have service.
We don't use that.
We don't use that one for service. The little one.
Over by the Columbarium.
Yeah, it's
Right.
never used for service.
But that's the, I think that's the newer one, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, because it was put in while they were working on
That's
the other one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
I could throw out for everybody's discussion about the details of the shelter. Whatever we put in this master plan update is not the final plan. They're just ideas. And literally, we'll be coming back to you guys after we get this done, which is hopefully by the end of the month and get John paid this fiscal year. Our goal is we're gonna be coming back to y'all like July, August timeframe with what our plan forward is gonna be and getting y'all's feedback on the details of the shelter. So we can go ahead and get moving on it.
That's
The
just-
really, the biggest thing with the master plan update is because of our budget, the master plan update is toning down how elaborate, expensive the original shelter will gonna be. So
Well, I understand that probably as well as anybody because I was part of it first. And I said from that time, we did not need anything that elaborate.
So that really, we're, for what we're coming up with ideas and stuff here, this is not the final plan, it's just some ideas showing how we're toning back. We'll be coming back to you guys in July and August with more what's gonna be the final direction we want to go and get y'all's input and direction. Because you've already told us you like Harrisburg and Junction City, stuff like that. Rick's been following up on that quite a bit. And so you know, after we get this done, we can come back, and start nailing the details.
These type of shelters, yeah, I would agree with that. In footprint, and scale and height.
One way in, a lot of two sidewalks going into it. You can't get into it from the other side. And that's a mess.
So,
Yeah, but it's the fact that you can get in from the other side.
it's the scale of it from a height
One
and.
side.
So if you look at any one of these 6 images, they're actually pretty simple. And probably wouldn't be, if you had the same footprint as one of these architectural styles as a Junction or Perryville or something, it'd probably be similar cost. Okay, great. Appreciate your all's input. Good to see everybody's always.
John, are you aware that we have a Friends of the Cemetery Fund that we trying to solicit
Yes,
donations?
I've heard
to?
about that. Thank you.
Who turned the light?